right, well, I'm back out here after too long of a break from doing this. I tried to come out here with Marshall and record the next step in this process, which was starting the infrastructure. But when we did come out, it was horribly windy and we made some mistakes in recording with the camera. So none of it really worked out. So I'm back today to try to explain what we did, which isn't that much, and what the next step is going forward. So you can see in here the perimeter, which comes together with this sheet bend and goes back to the edges with the bolts. So you can see it going the whole way around. What I did is I took some more of that perimeter rope and started what I call infrastructure. So I take the perimeter rope and I attach it using a stopper knot between bolts in a corner. And as you can see, the goal of doing that is to pull the direction inward of the net so that these outer strands get tighter and tighter and resist the inward bow that happens as we weave in this space here. So I start by fixing between two bolts. I look at the direction of the net and I sort of say to myself, what's the longest orientation or the longest vector I can create now from that attachment point? So it's usually straight across the net. So this was the first one I attached. I ran the rope clear across and used pulleys to attach to that tree branch and attached a prusik on the rope. And then I brought those two together and tied my knot on that side, but again, between the bolts. And as I did that, it put more tension onto the outer perimeter on any side of the net that was close to where I was pulling. So it happened there, it happened there, it happened there, it happened here. And then after I did that, I did another one that crosses it. So I attached a piece of rope here between the bolts. I took it over to there. I put some pulleys here. I put a prusik on there. I pulled it. At that point, I then took this rope and I said to myself, where will it intersect this rope? And that's where I put in this clove hitch. So I took my pulleys off, I took the rope, I knew where it was going to be. I put my clove hitch in there fairly loosely and I pulled it this direction because I knew that as I pulled the rope tight, it would slide the clove hitch in to a more tight position. If I put the clove hitch here and pulled, it wouldn't have had as much tension stored up. So by sliding the clove hitch over here, getting it taut, then attaching my rope and fixing it, I suddenly was able to again pull tension into my perimeter, my perimeter, my perimeter, my perimeter. As it pulls here, it's taking this rope inward. And additionally, it also added tension to this guy, which we know traces back and adds more tension to the perimeter. So ultimately, I think this is a way that takes tension and uses the interior portion of the net to add increasing outward tension to the perimeter, which is why I call it infrastructure. I really only have done this twice with this big fat rope. You could continue to use fat rope to do this, to go between as many bolts as you wanted. But I found that just doing a simple cross like this is usually enough to get my perimeter tight. And then what I generally do is take less rope of a lesser diameter that's still relatively static, and I start to weave that in here on the infrastructure as well as into other points that go in between bolts. And I avoid as much as I can touching this perimeter with this rope until I absolutely have sort of run out of space or really need to. And at that point, then I start to touch the perimeter with the static rope. So I'm gonna set the camera up and start to do that now with this rainbow colored rope, and you can see how I'll avoid where it touches the perimeter so that I can increase that tension on there. All right, so you can start to see how I add this other static rope in here and started it at the halfway point in between two bolts so that I had a shorter amount of rope to work with. So I had one long end here, one long end here, put a clove hitch, and then I ran it. And so I run it hitting these infrastructural points, possibly intersecting with itself, but the whole time trying to avoid touching this perimeter. And you can see as more and more tension gets pulled in, this acts like a whole huge pulley system as it gets woven, and it pulls this more and more to the degree that it gets very hard to put the rope underneath these sections as it gets tighter and tighter. So what I've learned to do there is to use like a carabiner or some kind of flat object to pry that open. You'll usually be able to get especially a lot more of this distance from these longer legs to creep through there and give you enough space that you can throw your rope through there. Something that I do is I use clove hitches on every single intersection of rope, every single time, no matter what the type of cordage is, throughout every single one of these nets. Every single place that rope, perimeter, infrastructure, paracord, all of it, it's all touching with clove hitches, which I know is overkill in the tree net community. I know most people don't do that, but what I can say is it makes both the static nature and ability to capture tension as you are weaving much greater. And it also makes long-term maintenance a lot easier. You can cut out or add to without having significant changes in the net itself. So if one place cuts because someone brought their, sharp knife up here, the whole net doesn't unravel. And I don't have to worry that people are gonna come tumbling out. So yeah, it takes a lot longer. You get really good at weaving clove hitches and your fingers become really strong. And it's a labor of love, but I personally think that it makes a big difference, especially like I said, when I'm going to capture progress on my tension here. I'm able to just do it in such a way that I can pull this, what I call the toggle of the clove hitch, and then milk the slack through by like rotating my hand and jiggling this working end. So I highly recommend looking into using clove hitches, at least for this infrastructural portion, because you can see how this is getting just like boing tight as I go through and do this, and it's only going to get tighter and tighter. I haven't even gotten an eighth of this filled in with the static rope, and still got a bunch to go here. So let's see how it goes. So I've woven two pieces of more rope into this. I still have one end to finish up here, and you can see how the tension is really just rigid and taking shape now. This knot is going to start to loosen or tighten up a bunch, and ultimately that'll be the very last leg that I attach any of my perimeter to, because I want this tension to be totally equalized through the whole thing before I start to play with that and bring it inside. So right now I'm going to finish up putting this last strand of rope through. I have one more piece here that I'm going to wait to put in until I have paracord to do the next step, because I've found that the tension equalizes out a lot better in the paracord if I weave it immediately after I've put in my static rope. And there's a number of reasons I think for that. I'll talk about that next time when I'm doing the actual paracord. But for the time being, you can sort of appreciate how this inward pull from inside the corners is exclusively pulling the outside out, which is the whole point of this infrastructural level. All right, looking pretty good. I really like the shape it's taking. It's pretty big and wide and open, and I don't expect it to bow in too much, especially like I mentioned in previous videos. Once I put walls up, the walls themselves, as you can see in these lower nets, help to keep that outer portion really out. So again, you'll see each step as we get further along. This one is one of the more important ones. I guess they're all important, but really maintaining that perimeter, like I've said throughout this whole thing, is very valuable. But I'll see you in the next one.